what's up guys, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, then welcome to our little corner of the internet. I am a little bit late for the news. This was posted 5 days ago. It's called "The United States Wants Out of Iran, Maybe." Oh, what does this mean? There's probably stuff that has happened during these 5 days. Just recently, I think I read that there was rumors that Donald Trump was in the hospital, but I don't think so. I think at least from the White House, they said that he's okay and he's at the White House working, but I don't know. You guys let me know what you think. So yeah, without further ado, let's see what this video is about.
As the fifth week of the war in Iran drags to a close, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. American President Donald Trump wants to get out of Iran, and fast. That's a message Trump has sent loud and clear in 3 different ways. First, according to a senior White House official who spoke to MS Now, formerly MSNBC, President Trump is getting bored with the war. Quoting the official, not that he regrets it or something, he's just bored and wants to move on. Another White House official agreed, telling the outlet that the president had begun to
That wording, don't you guys think that wording is a little bit insensitive? Bored with the war.
move on from the conflict and has started shifting his personal focus toward the economy, domestic issues, and the upcoming midterm elections. Second, according to a report by the Wall Street Journal, Trump told aides that he's now willing to end the campaign in Iran even if the Strait of Hormuz remained mostly closed. Pull out under those circumstances, and even in a very generous read of the situation, Trump's objectives would be partially achieved at best. Be a bit less generous, and withdrawing without opening the Strait of Hormuz would be a complete strategic failure, regardless of any attempt to pin blame on NATO. Either way, it represents a hell of a compromise with the clear end goal of removing Washington from the conflict. And third, Trump said as much himself during a recent address to America, where he told his constituents that the war was 2 to 3 weeks from a conclusion. Add a bit of support from Washington's partners at a moment when Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is telling his own people that Iran is no longer an existential threat, and the writing is on the wall. After a month of war, the United States is preparing to make an exit. So what's that exit look like? And is it even possible? A straight peace deal.
Time has passed so quickly. It's already been more than a month. Coming up to 2 months.
Given everything we've just mentioned, you would be forgiven for thinking that a peace deal between the Middle East's 3 warring parties was imminent. After all, if Donald Trump was really bored of the conflict, the fastest way to end it, besides a unilateral withdrawal, would be a ceasefire. But right now, signals from all sides would indicate that a deal is still a long ways away. On Wednesday, Trump posted on his social media platform, Truth Social, that Iran's new president had asked for a ceasefire. It's an encouraging statement, in theory, except that Iran doesn't have a new president. It's got a new supreme leader, Mujtaba Khamenei, who's replaced his father Ali Khamenei, but its president is still Masoud Pezeshkian. Nor does it seem like a simple mix-up. Mujtaba Khamenei is known to represent Iran's militaristic hardliners, but whoever Trump was talking about, he described the, quote, new president as much less radicalized and far more intelligent than his predecessors. In that same post, Trump offered another contradiction.
The new president, or was he referring to Mustafa? Because wasn't Mustafa even more like strict than his father was, and more kind of, you know, into the regime?
Time going back on what his own aides had told the press about his position. Online, Trump insisted that he would only consider a ceasefire once the Strait of Hormuz was opened. Until then, Washington would continue, quote, blasting Iran into oblivion, or as they say, back to the Stone Ages. Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. Trump reiterated this message during his address, insisting that the US would continue to hit Iran extremely hard in the coming 2 to 3 weeks. In the meantime, discussions would be continuing behind the scenes. Then, there's Iran's position. According to Reuters, Tehran has demanded a comprehensive ceasefire with lots of guarantees included meant to permanently end hostilities with the US and Israel and make it much more difficult to return to war in the future. But other outlets had a different story. The New York Times reported that multiple U.S. intelligence agencies had assessed that the Iranian government is currently not willing to engage in substantial negotiations after all. They say the Iranian government believes it is in a strong
Surprise, surprise. I mean, they've said this whole time that they're not going to negotiate at all.
position and does not have to accede to America's diplomatic demands. This assessment aligns with what well-placed analysts like the Atlantic Council's Danny Citronevitz have been saying about how Iran views itself in this war. That despite all its losses, Iran still believes it holds the upper hand. And while Tehran is willing to keep channels open, they said Iran does not trust the United States and does not think that Trump is serious about negotiations. We should note that in the past 12 months, Trump has ordered attacks on Iran twice in the middle of negotiations. Publicly, Iranian officials have rejected Trump's assertion that the two sides are making progress. A spokesman for Iran's foreign ministry said on Wednesday that Tehran had not asked for a ceasefire, despite Trump's claims to the contrary. Then there's the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump has repeatedly demanded that the strait be opened completely, but so far, Iran has categorically refused. Ibrahim Azizi, head of the Iranian Parliament's National Security Commission and one of the most powerful people in the country, recently wrote on X that the strait would not be open to Trump. Instead, it would be open for those who comply with Iran's new laws governing the strait, which would include paying a toll to Tehran. Given the strait's economic importance and Iran's ability to control it, the Emirates recently signaled that it's preparing to help the US open the Strait of Hormuz by force.
So it's still operative, but you have to pay, so the oil prices are still going to go up. But what I didn't understand if so it's closed for America or what?
According to the Wall Street Journal, Emirati diplomats have urged the United States, plus military powers in Europe and Asia, to form a coalition and intervene. To that end, the Emirates are lobbying for a United Nations Security Council resolution to authorize an operation, even though permanent members Russia and China are likely to veto. The Emirates are not the only ones pursuing action on the Strait of Hormuz. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced that the UK would host a meeting of 35 countries to discuss reopening the strait. That meeting is meant to clear the way for large-scale military cooperation to lock down the strait and make it safe and accessible once the fighting has died down. The nation of Pakistan, meanwhile, is still trying to push for peace. Despite the difference in American and Iranian positions right now, Pakistan is advertising a 5-point proposal for peace, hoping to capitalize on its relationship with both nations and gain a bit of diplomatic clout in the process. The 5-point proposal is also backed by China, which is a new development after Pakistan's foreign minister flew to Beijing on Tuesday. The proposal calls for an immediate end to all hostilities and the start of peace talks as soon as possible. All attacks on civilians and non-military targets would pause right away, safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz and other critical waterways would be guaranteed, and any lasting peace agreement would be based in international law. But if all of that sounds a bit overly optimistic, that's because it is overly optimistic. On the battlefield.
I mean, that would be quite nice, but yeah, no.
From negotiations, we have to turn toward developments on the battlefield, where the situation only continues to deteriorate. On Friday, the 27th of March, Israel broadened the scope of its attacks on Iranian economic targets when it struck two of Iran's largest steel factories in Avaz and Isfahan. Israeli security sources told Reuters that the strikes on the plants, which are partially owned by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, are expected to cause billions of dollars in damage to the Iranian economy and paralyze Iran's steel industry. Argus Media, an organization that focuses on global energy and commodities markets, reported that the strikes damaged storage facilities and power infrastructure at both Kyrgyzstan Steel and Mubarak Air, and said the attacks were expected to reduce Iran's production and its export capacity. Iran has one of the world's largest steel industries, and according to expert estimates, steel accounts for approximately 14% of the nation's non-oil and natural gas exports. One analyst told the Jerusalem Post that the strikes on the steel industry point to a broader US-Israeli strategy aimed at reducing Iran's foreign currency reserves to near zero. Quoting in here, "These sectors form the backbone of the country's foreign currency income. Cutting off these vital economic arteries would effectively aim to trigger a collapse of the Iranian economy, something that may not be far off given its already weakened state." And this is important because several analysts had previously accused the US of putting money in Iran's pockets by allowing Iranian oil to be sold on the international market after the war had sent oil prices through the roof. After the strikes on the steel factories, Iran quickly threatened full-scale retaliation. The country vowed to attack 6 steel plants in Israel and the Gulf states in what would have been a painful shock for global markets. However, at the time of writing, Iran was yet to target these facilities. On the 31st of March, Iranian media reported that Mubarak steel complex had once again been targeted in strikes. On the same day as the steel plant strikes, a missile and drone attack on Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia wounded at least 15 American service members, with 5 in serious condition. The attack damaged several U.S. refueling aircraft, with satellite imagery showing signs of damage on the apron used by U.S. aircraft and a heat signature consistent with flames. Even more important, the attack destroyed an immensely valuable E-3 Sentry, an early warning and control plane that—
What is that? I have never ever seen that. I've never ever seen that type of plane. Not even in the videos. We've watched so many videos. What is that?
Destroyed an immensely valuable E-3 Sentry, an early warning and control plane that the US only flies in relatively small numbers. Moving away from Iran, let's look at the Houthis. It has been about a week since they announced—
I'm guessing it's like a scanner on a plane, no?
to the world that they would be entering the battle, and so far, their influence has been limited. To this point, the Houthis have launched 3 small waves of attacks, each targeting Israel, including a joint attack coordinated with Hezbollah. In a televised statement, Houthi spokesperson Yahya Saree announced that the attack had successfully achieved its objectives. However, the Israeli military claims that the Houthis have scored 0 hits. Right now, it seems that the Houthis have avoided attacks on a target much closer to home, the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, a critical waterway that they could shut down to cut off access to the Red Sea, similar to the way that Iran has shut down the Strait of Hormuz to cut off access to the Persian Gulf. But rather than attacking the Bab al-Mandeb directly, the Houthis seem to be focused mostly on noise-making, reminding the world that they're still around, they're still dangerous, and they're still willing to get in on the fight. In Iraq, a drone strike on the 28th of March targeted the home of Nechavan Barzani, the president of Iraqi Kurdistan. A local official told the Associated Press that while there had been property damage, there were no casualties. That attack is important for 2 reasons, but mostly because of the person who was targeted. Aside from going after each other's leadership, Israel and Iran have avoided attacks on prominent Middle Eastern figures, even when Iran attempts to punish the Gulf states by attacking their infrastructure. So by targeting a high-profile leader, even a regional figure like Barzani, it's a major escalation. Barzani is a very important Kurdish official. He is the grandson of the founder of the Kurdistan Democratic Party and enjoys immense popularity with both the Kurds and minority groups living on Iraqi Kurdish territory. If the attack had been successful, Kurdish forces would have immediately retaliated. But it's not clear who their target would have been. And that brings us to the second reason we chose to highlight this story. No one has claimed responsibility for the attack. Iran's revolution—
Again, guys, there's so much going on. How much have I missed? I've only been— I haven't done maybe videos on this in like a week, maybe?
Revolutionary Guard even released a statement calling the drone attack an act of terrorism, according to the semi-official Iranian news agency Mehr News. Despite the statement, most fingers are pointing toward Iran, or an Iranian-backed militia, as the responsible party based on their previous attacks against Iraqi Kurdistan. In response, Washington didn't mince words. It put out a statement directly accusing Iran's proxies of carrying out the attack. Barzani wasn't the only Kurdistan leader that was targeted. Security sources told Reuters that air defenses had shot down a drone near the residence of the leader of the Iraqi Kurdish ruling party, Masoud Barzani. Masoud Barzani is the former Kurdish president and Nechavan's uncle. Finally, we have to talk about an attack that still hasn't happened yet, as of the time of writing, but is looking increasingly likely with every passing day. On the 1st of April, The Atlantic reported that military officials are planning for 2 potential ground assaults in Iran, one on Karg Island, the hub of the country's energy industry, and the other to seize enriched uranium and hobble Iran's nuclear development program. The only thing they're waiting for—
The ground invasion has been talked about so much, but I just doubt that it's going to happen, honestly, at this point. I don't know, what do you guys think?
is President Trump's approval. Putting troops on Iranian territory would be one of the most dangerous missions undertaken during either of Trump's terms. As we've mentioned in previous videos, capturing Karg Island would need US troops to be exposed to Iranian missiles and drones for a long period, and holding the island would require a prolonged US presence on Iranian soil. A mission to recover the nuclear material would be equally dangerous. US forces would need to operate deep inside Iranian territory, potentially under fire from missiles and drones, while specialized teams searched through rubble to find the material. Despite the danger, the reward isn't guaranteed. The Atlantic notes that neither operation would reliably force the war to end within weeks, as Trump has promised. Neither would be likely to cause the collapse of the regime, nor the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. The precarious rise of J.D. Vance. And finally, we've got to take a moment to discuss U.S. Vice President.
What does J.D. Vance have to do with it? Yeah, I highly doubt there's gonna be a ground invasion, and I kind of hope there's not going to be one, because that would be very dangerous.
J.D. Vance. During the lead up to the war, Vance was one of the most skeptical voices in the White House, with Axios reporting that he questioned the war's duration, purpose, and anticipated impact on U.S. munitions stockpiles. Trump seemed to allude that Vance may have held on to that position in private discussions about Iran, telling reporters that Vance was, philosophically, a little bit different than Trump's own position at the outset of the conflict. Once it became clear that President Trump had decided to go to war with Iran, Vance fell in line and advocated for using overwhelming military force to end the conflict as quickly as possible. But despite his quick compliance, he was effectively sidelined in favor of more hawkish figures like Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who made a lot more media appearances defending the war and its objectives. However, things quickly changed when Washington turned to negotiations in the hopes of finding an off-ramp. As part of these talks, Iran indicated that it did not want to re-enter negotiations with U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner because they were leading the talks when the war erupted. A Gulf source told The Telegraph, quoting them here, "They don't want to work with Jared and Witkoff because they stabbed them in the back." Although the Iranians preferred Vance, America's VP made it clear that he wasn't going to be a walkover. Sources told CNN that the vice president had delivered a stern message to Tehran that there would be increased pressure on their infrastructure because President Trump was impatient to make a deal. Vance has been equally tough on Israel. According to Axios, Vance took Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to task in a Monday phone call for overstating the possibility that the US-Israeli bombing campaign in Iran could topple its regime. The relationship between Vance and Jerusalem has been acrimonious for a while, with the vice president's advisors believing that some in Israel were trying to undermine the vice president because he was insufficiently hawkish on Iran, a claim that Israeli officials deny. Despite these headwinds, being tapped to lead the negotiations has given Vance a more public-facing role in a war that has largely seen him take a backseat. Trump made Vance's role official in a cabinet meeting on Thursday, asking the VP to give an update on Iran and noting that he was working with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner on the negotiations. But that elevated role exposes Vance to even greater political risks. Speaking during a White House Easter lunch, President Trump said that if a deal didn't happen, he would blame J.D. Vance, and if it did happen, he would take full credit. While this could very easily have been a joke, President Trump has a long documented history of taking credit for other people's achievements and publicly distancing himself from anything he considers to be a failure. For J.D. Vance, the war in Iran might make or break his political future.
Isn't J.D. Vance kind of like a controversial person as well? I'm not sure because I don't really know exactly who he is, but that's what I kind of collected from these videos. But yeah, either way, guys, thank you so much for joining me for this video. The situation is just confusing. Everybody's kind of clearly waiting to see what's going to happen, but there's no way to say for sure. I really hope that there's no ground invasion. Obviously, I think everybody would hope that the war doesn't go on for much longer and that there is some type of solution to it, and hopefully it hasn't been in vain neither. But yeah, I guess there's no other way to know than to wait and see. So either way, guys, thank you for joining me again. Please leave a like, subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!